my name is Avery Carter. And I guess you could say this all started the day my body gave out in front of 1,000 people. I was hosting my usual Saturday morning live stream, guiding a gentle yoga flow, when my arms trembled halfway through warrior pose. I remember the mat rising toward my face, the screen going black, and the flood of worried comments I never got to answer. When I came to, everything felt blurry. My limbs were lead-heavy, like someone had stolen the strength from inside me while I wasn't looking. The ER doctor ran a dozen tests before finally saying the words I had to Google later: polymyositis, a rare autoimmune disease that slowly weakens your muscles and makes even climbing stairs feel like climbing Everest. I didn't cry. Not right away. I just nodded and said okay, and tried to look braver than I felt. They admitted me overnight. And I remember lying in that stiff hospital bed, thinking about all the things I might never do again: hike, teach, lift my own suitcase. It felt like my body had turned against me without warning or reason. My mom showed up before the sun rose. Hair perfect. Holding green juice and tears she didn't bother to wipe away. Dad followed. All business. Already asking about insurance and treatment costs. Then came Blake, my little brother. Phone in hand, like always. Filming a story for his followers about being strong for family. They said I should come home. At least for a while. It made sense. They had space. And I had no energy to argue. So I moved back into my childhood bedroom. Tucked between framed soccer ribbons and posters I hadn't touched since high school. Everyone kept saying it was temporary. Just until I felt stronger. At first, they were amazing. Warm meals. Extra pillows. Vitamin schedules taped to the fridge. My mom held my hand during doctor calls. Blake brought me ice cream and jokes. Dad set up a home nurse. It felt like maybe I was lucky to have a family that cared this much. But somewhere between the comfort and the control, something shifted. Tiny moments that didn't sit right. Conversations that stopped when I walked into the room. Phone calls behind closed doors. And a strange tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with the disease. I told myself it was the meds. Or the stress. Or the grief of losing my old routine. That families aren't perfect. That maybe I was being sensitive. But the more I rested, the more I watched, and the more I couldn't ignore the quiet things piling up. That's the thing about getting sick. People say it brings out the best in those around you. Sometimes, it brings out something else. And I was about to find out just how far that could go. Close-up shot of me in the hospital. Eyes half shut. An IV taped to my arm. Lips dry and pale. My mom had taken it without me noticing. Probably right after I passed out from the muscle biopsy. The headline read, "On 9. Help Avery fight a rare disease." The words didn't feel like mine. The caption talked about courage, medical depth, and prayers. I read it twice before realizing it already had hundreds of shares. I scrolled through the comments, strangers sending love, friends promising donations, old high school classmates tagging others to spread the word. My stomach turned. Not because they cared, but because I hadn't been asked. When I brought it up, Mom smiled, like she'd done me a favor. She said people wanted to help. And this was the best way. Then she added that I shouldn't worry about logistics. Just focus on healing. I nodded because arguing felt exhausting. And maybe she was right. Maybe it was easier to let them handle everything. Blake made a TikTok the same day. He framed it like a tribute clips of us as kids. Me doing yoga. Then ending with my hospital photo and slow piano music. The last words on screen were, "She's always been strong. Now it's our turn to be strong for her." It went viral overnight. 10,000 views by morning. With comments asking how they could donate. They were building something. A movement. A cause. My cause. But I wasn't part of the conversation. I was just the image they held up. I tried not to think too much about it. I told myself this money would help. The medications weren't cheap. And insurance didn't cover all of it. So, I kept quiet when Mom mentioned how overwhelming it was managing the fundraiser. I didn't say anything when Blake filmed another video beside my bed, holding my hand dramatically while I pretended to be asleep. Every time I asked about the donations, someone changed the subject. Dad would say not to stress myself. Mom would hand me herbal tea and say peace of mind was part of the recovery. Blake just laughed it off and said I'd thank them later. But the hospital kept sending bills. Thick envelopes with long numbers and final warnings. I remember holding one in my lap, staring at the total, while Mom decorated a thank you basket for a donor. I asked her why the hospital hadn't received any payments yet. She didn't look up from the ribbons. She said these things took time to process. It was hard to argue from a recliner. My muscles ached too much to stand some days. My vision blurred from the steroids. I told myself to trust them. I wanted to believe they meant well. It was easier to believe that than to sit with the feeling growing in my chest every time I heard Blake rehearse his emotional update in the hallway. At some point, I stopped asking. I convinced myself that staying calm was more important than answers. That money was messy. And maybe they had a plan. But a part of me, a small voice, I tried to silence, kept asking the same question. If this money was really for me, why did it feel like I had no say in any of it? That question never left. It followed me into appointments, whispered behind phone calls, and curled into the pit of my stomach each time I saw my face in another post. I wasn't just sick anymore. I had become a brand, a campaign, a story other people got to write. And the worst part, I had no idea how much they were collecting. I only knew I still owed the hospital. And the more I asked, the more alone I started to feel in my own recovery. I was still in the hospital when Tess came by with iced coffee, and something in her eyes she hadn't brought before. She didn't say much at first. Just asked how I was feeling, fluffed my pillow, and sat beside me like she was waiting for the right moment. Then she pulled out her phone and opened Instagram. I didn't even have to ask. The post was already up. My mom, lying on a beach chair with a cucumber mask and a caption that read, "Taking care of ourselves so we can care for her better." Blake had posted a video of a champagne toast at some rooftop bar, with the song Keep Fighting playing in the background. Tess scrolled slowly, like she wasn't sure I should see it all at once. There were pictures from a spa in Napa, a dinner at a 5-star restaurant, matching robes, yoga with ocean views, all of it framed as self-care during the storm. And every post, without fail, mentioned me. While Avery fights, we breathe for her. Healing energy for our girl. Grateful to those who gave us the strength to be strong. I didn't know what to say. I couldn't even sit up straight. My body was still sore from the last round of infusions, and my hands shook every time I reached for water. And they were. At the beach I looked at Tess, hoping she'd laugh and say it wasn't what it looked like. But her eyes just softened, and she shook her head. I asked if she thought the fundraiser was paying for all that. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Later that night, I checked the hospital app again. My account was still flagged. My last invoice had been forwarded to collections. No payments. No activity. Nothing had changed. I stared at the ceiling for a long time. I thought about that photo of Mom in the infinity pool. I thought about the word selfless that someone had commented under Blake's post. And I thought about the oxygen monitor still clipped to my finger. Something didn't add up. Something felt cracked. And the more I tried to push it away, the colder it felt inside me. Maybe they needed a break. Maybe they were just overwhelmed. Maybe they really believed they were helping by keeping me out of the mess. But I was starting to wonder if I was the only one not allowed to benefit from my own suffering. Mom walked in with a shopping bag like it was a prize she'd earned. She smiled wide. The kind of smile people wear when they've already decided how you're supposed to feel. Inside the bag was a designer tote. Pale blue leather with gold hardware. Still wrapped in tissue. She said it was for my spirit. Something to lift me up. She called it a healing gift. I stared at it for a long time, unsure whether to say thank you or ask why. The tag was still on, It cost more than one of my infusion treatments. When I asked about the hospital bills, she waved a hand, like I'd brought up something trivial. "You don't need to think about money," she said. "Just rest." Rest was her favorite word lately. Rest. Relax. Recover. While she posted about my strength from a vineyard with inspirational quotes under every glass of wine, I waited until she left the room before opening my laptop. It took a few tries to get the login right, but eventually I pulled up my billing portal. Nothing had been paid. Not one invoice. Not even the emergency room visit from the day I collapsed. The collection notices were still there. So were the late fees. I clicked through the statements, feeling my pulse slow with every screen. It wasn't even anger. Not yet. Just this heavy, the hollow understanding that everything they said they were doing for me wasn't actually for me at all. I looked back at the tote sitting on my nightstand, gleaming under the lamp like it belonged to someone stronger. Someone who hadn't just discovered their medical debt was being ignored in favor of photo ops. I didn't cry. I didn't even touch the bag. I just shut the screen, pulled the blanket up, and stared at the ceiling, trying to remember the last time I felt like I had control over anything at all. It started with a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I was halfway down the stairs when I caught Dad saying the words, "farewell celebration." His voice was low, but the words landed sharp, like glass in my chest. Mom responded something about sponsorship tiers and guest lists. I backed up slowly, my heart thudding harder than it should have. They didn't hear me. I sat on the top step, out of sight, and listened. They were talking about a gala, a fundraiser, in my name, as if I were already gone. The next day, I slid my phone under a blanket on the couch and hit record. I didn't know what I was hoping to catch. Maybe a fluke, a misunderstanding. But within minutes, they were at it again, talking about invitations, flower arrangements, and how much sympathy could be translated into donations. Dad said the silent auction could bring in at least 30 grand. Mom said the keynote speaker should be someone who cried easily. They were building an event around my death, and they were excited. I kept recording. Every afternoon. Every hallway whisper. Every phone call they didn't take near me. I started a folder on my desktop, labeling files by date. I took screenshots of every fundraiser update, saved every photo, every caption. It wasn't about paranoia anymore. It was about proof. They didn't think I'd make it. That was the part that sank deepest. I wasn't just being used. I was being counted out, cashed in, like I was already a memory they could monetize. Blake walked into my room the next morning with a notebook and said he was working on tribute slides for the gala. He asked if I had any old childhood photos he could use. I nodded like I hadn't already seen his sketch of a memorial board titled, "In Her Honor." I said I was too tired to talk, then turned to the wall and waited for him to leave. Once the door clicked shut, I opened my drawer and pulled out the small digital recorder I'd hidden there. I pressed play and listened to their voices spill out in calm, practiced tones. They weren't scared. They weren't grieving. They were preparing. That's when it changed for me. The fear shifted. The grief hardened. I stopped asking why they were doing this, and started asking how to stop them. Tess sat beside me on my bed, her laptop balanced on her knees, the glow from the screen catching the edge of her jaw. She had that same look she wore when we used to cram for finals focused. Silent. Bracing for something neither of us wanted to find. I watched her scroll through bank records, donation logs, withdrawal slips. Every transaction from the GoFundMe account led to one place. My mom's personal checking. Not a medical provider. Not a treatment center. Just her. And from there, the trail split into spas, a boutique, hotel reservations, and designer furniture. There were no hospital payments. Not one. Not even a copay. I felt something shift inside me, not the sharp stab of betrayal, but the slow collapse of trust that had already been dying for weeks. I wasn't just a daughter with a disease. I was a tool, A tool they were using with precision. Tess didn't say anything for a long time. She just kept scrolling, clicking, screenshotting, building a quiet digital graveyard of everything they'd stolen. They weren't waiting for me to get better. They were betting on me not being here to ask questions. That's why Mom looked panicked when I asked about the bills. Why Blake started posting more memorial-style content. Why they'd already picked a theme for the gala. They were planning the end of the story, and they expected me to stay silent through the final chapter. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just whispered. Almost to myself. They think I won't live long enough to stop them. Tess looked up. Her voice low but steady. Then we proved them wrong. The day after we confirmed where the money had gone, I stopped waiting to be saved. I told Tess we needed help. The kind of help that came with a press badge and a voice louder than mine. That's when she mentioned Eli Torres. We hadn't spoken in years. Not since sophomore year of college, when we dated for all of 2 months. But Eli had become a reporter with a reputation for exposing local corruption. I sent him everything. The fundraiser page. The bank records. The photos. The voice recordings. He called back within an hour. He didn't ask if it was real. He said, "Tell me what you want to do." That's when the plan started to form. Not just revenge. Not just payback. A full dismantling of everything they'd built on top of my body. I told Eli about the gala. About the tribute. About how they were telling people I might not make it another month. He asked if I could get inside. I told him not yet. But I knew who could help. The lead sponsor of the event was a man named Henry Colton. A business owner who'd once worked with my dad and donated $50. Zero to the fundraiser. He was also listed as a keynote guest at the gala. Tess helped me draft an email. I included proof, receipts, and a quiet request to speak in person. He replied within the day. We met at a coffee shop near the marina. I wore long sleeves to hide the bruises from injections and sat tall when I spoke. I didn't cry. I showed him the records. I let him listen to a snippet of Dad's voice discussing donation tiers, like it was a sales pitch. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "If this is true, they're not just stealing from donors. They're exploiting a community's trust." I asked if he could get me into the gala. Not as a guest. As a speaker. He looked at me for a long moment. Then nodded. "I'll make sure you have access. Just tell me when." Back at home. I smiled more. Said thank you more. Let Mom dress me in soft sweaters and Blake snap photos with dim lighting. I praised the soup. I asked about the weather. I listened when they told me to rest. Every move rehearsed. Every word carefully placed. They thought I was giving up. I was buying time. Each night, I added to the file. I recorded Dad talking about VIP guests. I captured Mom rehearsing what she'd say about my final months. I archived every Instagram post Blake made. Every donation link they shared. I saved it all to a password-protected drive Eli could access in case something went wrong. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of them. Not of being seen as dramatic or ungrateful. The truth was louder than their story now. And it was building. By the end of the week, Tess had mapped out the timeline. Eli had lined up local press. Henry had confirmed I'd be introduced as a special guest speaker. The projector would be ready. The donors would be seated. The cameras would be rolling. All I had to do was walk into a room where they expected to mourn me. And speak. The night before the gala, my phone buzzed with a notification that stopped me cold. It was from Blake's Instagram. The post was black and white. A photo of me from high school. Soft lit. Smiling off to the side, like I was already a memory. The caption said something about peace. About letting go. About celebrating life instead of mourning it. I stared at it so long I forgot to blink. Tess leaned over. Read it once. And didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The silence around us was enough. Then came the flood. Mom posted next. A close-up of my hand in hers. taken without my knowledge during a hospital stay. The caption read, "We're preparing to say goodbye. She fought so bravely. Now she rests." Below that were hashtags pretending to carry meaning. Angel on Earth. Number God's Plan. Number Final Journey. I scrolled through the comments. Each one a dagger. Sending prayers. Heartbreaking. She was such a light. People were donating again. This time, with messages about legacy and heaven. A few said they couldn't make the gala but had mailed letters. Others were flying in. I took screenshots of every word. Every post. Every tag. There was one from Dad, too. It was a blurry photo of our front porch swing. The caption saying it had been my favorite spot. That he still imagined hearing my laughter there. The lie was so polished it could have been engraved. I kept scrolling. Jaw clenched so tight it ached. My body was trembling. Not from illness, but from the weight of watching my own death unfold online while I was still breathing. They hadn't just written me off. They'd staged the funeral. Tess placed her hand on mine, grounding me, reminding me I was still here. I nodded and took a breath. It wasn't grief I felt. It wasn't even shock anymore. It was fuel. They thought I wouldn't make it. They thought I'd stay in bed while they cashed in on my name. Draped in black and wiping fake tears for the cameras. They thought I'd be too weak. Too far gone. Too silent. They didn't know I'd be reading every word. That night, I printed the posts. I highlighted captions. I circled dates. I made sure everything was in order. Every lie preserved exactly as they told it. Tomorrow, I would walk into a room full of people who believed I was already gone. And I would speak for the girl they tried to bury before she stopped breathing. The ballroom lights were dimmed just enough to make everything shimmer. Gold accents. Candlelit centerpieces. Rows of guests in black, sipping champagne and dabbing their eyes with folded napkins. A slideshow played on the projector. Cycling through baby photos of me. My name in cursive, at the bottom corner like I was a brand. Dad stepped onto the stage. Dressed in a tailored suit. Voice already trembling. He talked about strength. About courage. About how proud he was to be my father. Each sentence was a stitch in the lie they'd sewn so carefully. He paused for effect. Let the room breathe. Then added that I had taught him how to love deeper. Live fuller. And face the hardest goodbyes. Blake was in the front row, holding his phone just high enough to livestream. A single tear rolled down his cheek. I wondered if he practiced it beforehand. Then the room went still. There was no announcement. No music. Just the sound of my heels hitting the floor. Click. 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 Heads turned slowly at first. Like they didn't trust what they were seeing. Then gasps. Hands to mouths. Someone whispering a prayer as if I were a ghost. I walked straight down the center aisle. Past the candlelit sympathy. Past the donors and the old neighbors. Past the volunteers in black ribbons. I walked in a red dress that cut clean against the sorrow. Bold and alive and undeniable. Dad froze mid-sentence. The microphone lowered from his hand. Forgotten. Blake dropped his phone. The screen hit the carpet face down. I reached the foot of the stage and looked up. No one moved. No one breathed. I could hear my own heartbeat louder than the music still playing softly overhead. They had gathered to bury me. And now they didn't know what to do with the fact that I was standing right in front of them. Alive. And ready? I took the microphone, and the room grew even quieter. If that was possible. I clicked the remote once. And the projector flickered to a new slide, a close-up of a hospital bill with a glaring 0 in the paid column. The next showed a credit card statement with charges for a spa weekend, followed by another receipt for an expensive dinner at a place I'd never been invited to. I spoke slowly. Clearly. I explained how every dollar donated to my so-called treatment was siphoned off for vacations, designer bags, and nights out while my medical bills piled up unpaid. The audience shifted uncomfortably as I named dates. Showed text messages, and played snippets from recordings I'd made. Henry Colton, the lead sponsor, stood up and addressed the crowd. His voice was steady as he announced his withdrawal from the gala and promised to fund a legitimate charity for autoimmune disease research instead. Cameras clicked as reporters rushed forward, capturing every stunned expression. My family scrambled. Mom tried to tear up, begging for understanding. But the mascara-streaked face no longer commanded sympathy. Dad's attempts to deny were cut short by mounting evidence flashing across the screen. Blake's phone buzzed nonstop with messages he couldn't answer. The room erupted in whispers and questions. I lowered the remote and looked around, feeling the weight of truth settle in the air. For the first time, I was no longer invisible. The story was no longer theirs to tell. It was mine. The courtroom was quiet, the air heavy, but somehow lighter than I expected. The judge's voice carried clear, outlining sentences that felt both just and necessary. Mom received 5 years for her role in the fraud. Dad got 8 for conspiracy and money laundering. And Blake's 18 months came with the condition that he testify fully. Hearing those words was like watching a long chapter close. I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow, not for them, but for the version of myself that had believed family meant trust. The woman who had been silenced, used, and kept in the dark was finally free to speak without fear. The hospital cleared my debts in a gesture I still can't fully believe. The community, hurt and betrayed, but compassionate, rallied behind me. Donations poured into a new foundation dedicated solely to supporting people with autoimmune diseases. One built on transparency and care. I moved out of the house I'd known since childhood, and into a small apartment filled with sunlight and quiet. Each box I unpacked was like reclaiming pieces of my life. Of who I was before the sickness and the lies. I was no longer just a patient or a victim. I was Avery whole, imperfect, and determined. Some days are still hard. The illness hasn't gone away, and some scars aren't visible. But now, when I look in the mirror, I see someone who fought back and won her voice. Someone who chose herself. And that makes all the difference. Moving out of the house that once felt like a cage was the first step toward finding myself again. I signed the lease on a small apartment filled with sunlight and space for quiet mornings. It wasn't much, but it was mine, a place where the walls didn't whisper lies or hold memories I wasn't ready to face. A few months later, I released my book, Dead to Them, Alive to Myself. It wasn't just a memoir, it was a declaration. Part of every sale went to research for autoimmune diseases, hoping to help others who might feel as lost as I once did. Holding that first printed copy in my hands, I felt a weight lift. Like I was finally reclaiming the story that had been stolen. The days aren't perfect. Some mornings, the illness reminds me it's still here. But now, those moments don't define me. I find joy in small things, a walk in the park, the warmth of a coffee mug, the laugh of a friend who's been there through everything, no longer shadowed by betrayal. I choose freedom. I'm not their legacy. I'm my own. And every step forward is a reminder that survival isn't just about living, it's about thriving on your own terms. I want to speak directly to anyone watching who's ever felt like they were just a background in someone else's story. Have you ever been used, whether by family, friends, or someone you trusted as a way to gain attention or control? If you have, you're not alone. It's painful to feel invisible or like your struggles are being exploited for someone else's gain. But here's what I want you to know, your voice matters. Your story is yours to tell, not theirs to shape or sell. It can be scary to speak up, but sharing your truth is how healing begins. I invite you to leave your story in the comments. Because when we share, we build a community that lifts each other up. No one should ever silence your pain or your strength. You deserve to be heard, respected, and supported. So use your voice. Tell your story. And know that you're not alone in this.